Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. My name's Stuart Easton from Transparent Choice. I'm the CEO and one of the founders here. And as you can tell, I'm not in the office today. I'm on a bridge, and the reason I came here is because we're going to be talking about Megaprojects today. And this bridge didn't exist a couple of years ago. This bridge was part of an upgrade, about a $2 billion, £1.5 billion upgrade of the A14 just outside Cambridge in England. And as you can see, there are plenty of vehicles on the road now. As I said, this bridge didn't exist. And we're here to talk about mega projects and why they fail. This one, as it happens, was actually fairly successful. But before we get to that, I just want to make sure, there are probably a couple of people on the planet who haven't used Zoom before. So what I thought I would do is just walk you through some of the controls. If you want to ask a question, there's a Q&A button there. Preeti will be monitoring Q&A. If she can answer them during the session, she will do. Otherwise, we'll try and answer some questions towards the end. So just hit the Q&A button and enter your questions there. There's also a chat button there. Feel free to jump onto the chat and talk to, just ask questions that way or make comments. It's always good for these events to be as interactive as possible. Next slide, Preeti, please. Great. So this is where I am. This is what this site looked like a couple of years ago. It was quite phenomenal when they built this bridge. They actually brought in the vehicle you can see in the bottom right there. As I was driving along one day, taking my kids to school, I tried counting the number of wheels on this thing, and I gave up once we got past 100. Right? It was a phenomenal vehicle, and they built the bridge in the field, just right over here. They built the bridge in that field, and then they lifted the bridge in one piece overnight. They lifted it into place using that rather specialized vehicle. It was phenomenal to see. So as I said, this was a couple of $1 billion project. They built something like 34 new bridges as part of this project. And the thing that was really inspiring to me was that they actually finished this project about 8 months early. And in the first 2 months, something like 400 vehicles used this road that I'm standing over right now. Right. So this bridge I'm standing on is kind of a symbol that mega projects can go well. Of course, we're here today to talk about what happens when they don't go well. Right. But I thought we'd start with an optimistic note and celebrate the fact that very often these projects do go well. And that's despite some really sort of interesting challenges that they had to contend with. Preeti, do you want to just click on the next item? There we go. So part of this project, this road that we're standing above is actually an old Roman road. And so as part of this project, they not only had to build 34 bridges and 21 miles of new carriageway and all this kind of good stuff, but they also found a number of woolly mammoth tusks. They found a number of stone henges, 4,000 or 5,000-year-old stone henges, Roman settlements, Iron Age settlements, you name it. So these projects are complicated. There are things you don't expect, and I suspect we're going to touch on some of those issues as we go through the session. So why are we here? Why are we hosting it? Why is Transparent Choice hosting it? Now the sign up today is kind of about 50-50. About half of you know Transparent Choice and know who we are and what we do. The other half don't. So for those of you who know us, you probably know us mostly because we do project prioritization software. But that's not all that we do. So project prioritization software is important in mega projects because a lot of mega projects kind of fail before they get started because they're the wrong projects. They're picked for the wrong reasons, perhaps for political reasons or vanity reasons or whatever it may be. And there is a way of doing it better, and that method is called AHP, and that's what we do in our software. We're not really going to talk about that too much today, or in fact at all. This is really going to be the Atif show today. but that prioritization piece, selecting which mega projects to do, is really what limits the value that you can deliver using from those mega projects. And then once you've started a mega project, the decisions that you make during the project are really the lifeblood of the project. You know, which vendors do you use? Where do you build your road, or where do you build your airport, whatever it may be? These decisions can make or break your project. If you get them right, your project can just skim along nice and quickly. But if you get them wrong, you can find yourself bogged down in, you know, law cases, lawsuits, and all kinds of different things. Next slide, please, Preeti. So over the years, we've actually supported projects, mega projects in Australia and Korea, where they were looking for the site for to build a new airport. We've done things like big strategic transportation reviews, big transportation infrastructure reviews in Brazil. We've looked at how to route new power lines, big, you know, whole new power line infrastructure through the middle of towns. We've looked at placing major contracts and helped organizations make major contracts. And the key thing in all of these decisions is that by using the AHP process, a decision methodology that we have, the decisions have gone quicker, with better results, and much stronger stakeholder buy-in. And that stakeholder buy-in can really make the difference, because that can be the difference between getting bogged down in lawsuits and actually having friendly neighbors who join in and help your project. So enough about us. Preeti, next slide, please. This is actually a session run by Atif Ansar. So Atif is chairman of Foresight Works, which is a software company that's based in Oxford, and they help reduce the risk in mega projects through predictive analytics. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Atif actually is a fellow at Keble College, Oxford, which is my old college. Oddly enough, we discovered that after we'd been talking for a while. But Atif was actually at Oxford the founding director of the program on sustainable future of capital-intensive industries. Now that one really trips off the tongue. I suspect that was dreamt up down at the Lamb and Flag or somewhere like that, just around the corner from Keble. At least I hope it was. He's also the program director for the Oxford University Masters in Major Program Management. He teaches on the UK and Australian Government Major Project Leadership Academy, visiting fellow at Stanford University, and I could go on and on and on. Bottom line is, Atif is a very well respected, very well researched chap in this area. His research has covered decision making under uncertainty, which is something we know a thing or two about at Transparent Choice. Project forecasting. He's done research into over-optimization and governance processes of mega projects and so on. And most recently, Atif has taken this research out of the lab and turned into a real-world company, which is Foresight Works. So Atif, welcome.
Thank you very much, Stuart. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you today. One of the reasons why Stuart extended his introduction was because my computer wasn't working. And this is one of the many reasons why mega projects fail. So, you know, it's just how this world works. But allow me to share my screen and take it over. Stuart, a real pleasure to be with you and all the colleagues. As Stuart very kindly mentioned, I'm a fellow of Keble College and Saïd Business School at University of Oxford. And I'm also co-founder of this company called Foresight Works, and we make a product called Knowledge Concierge. And I'll tell you a little bit about that, but really a massive thank you for all of you for being here. And today we'll be talking about 3 reasons or 3 causes of mega project failure and what we do about them. And how we fix it. This is Oxford, for those of you who may not know it. It's the best university in the world. Cambridge second. Well done to them. And I say that without modesty. Oxford is, you know, ranks #1 across many metrics and many of the faculties. And that's certainly true of the mega project management faculty here as well. So in terms of number of papers that as a collective we've published, or the courses we lead, it's certainly at the forefront globally in terms of research and teaching on this. And there are 2 important kind of streams of courses we run in this area. One is the MSc in Major Program management, on which Stuart's been a very kind presenter in the past, as well as the Major Projects Leadership Academy, which started out as an executive education course for senior civil servants in the UK, but has since then been adopted as a model by the governments of Australia as well as Hong Kong. And that's simply because mega projects are so essential to the future of many of these countries. I shan't bore you too much about myself, apart from my various academic roles. I'm very interested in how technology and large capital interact with each other and how one uses technology to improve its delivery. I grew up in Pakistan, so it's a great passion of mine of how we bring the fruits of the welfare that mega projects create to countries all over the world. So let's dive deep into getting mega projects right. Mega projects are large dollar investments, typically $1 billion plus, that have the potential to transform companies and countries. So this is Norris Dam, built in the 1930s, one of the New Deal dams that Franklin Roosevelt kicked off. And these mega projects are typically held up as emblems of social as well as economic development. Albert Hirschman, a great sociologist, called them particles of development. So essentially the vessels that take a company or a country from being less mature, less developed, into being more developed, more mature, and more technologically sophisticated. Philip Selznick, a sociologist I've studied at some length, he calls them as essential to modern society. So the necessity of modern society and its technology requires us to build more and more mega projects. And they are even more important in the context of the fourth industrial revolution. So as you all know, the fourth industrial revolution, the world's gone from manual to mechanical, from mechanical to electrical, and from electrical to digital. And that digital revolution rests upon huge amount of infrastructure, typically in the form of mega projects. However, in terms of building of mega projects itself, the fourth industrial revolution is not happening to mega projects. So although mega projects are essential to this data revolution, they themselves are very data poor. And we see this in industry level data as well as project level data. So this particular slide comes from David Wilson at Bechtel. He's the Chief Innovation Officer there. And he presented that at a conference at Oxford University. And what the green saber shows is gains in labor productivity in the US in the last 50 years in the general economy. Sectors like retail, technology, banking, even agriculture have drastically improved in terms of their labor productivity. The red saber shows decline in construction. So in David Wilson's example, a like-for-like oil refinery or a wind farm built today by Bechtel takes 30% more labor than it did for them 20 years ago. And this is a really rather alarming state of affairs, considering that every single other sector in the economy is using far less inputs to generate more outputs. That same performance or poor performance paradox we pick up in our data set with colleagues at Oxford. It's the world's largest data set of its kind, over 6,000 mega projects. And what you can see in the top row is issues of cost overrun, and then the third row, time overrun, are pervasive all over the world, irrespective of mega project asset type. So be it a road or a rail project or a dam or a bridge, and certainly the Olympics, they suffer from horrendous cost overruns and time overruns. In fact, Tokyo Olympics would be the first Olympics in history, in modern history, which have been delayed. So in fact, up until now, people spent all kinds of money to make sure the Olympics were done on time, but the Tokyo Olympics have now missed that because of an outsized risk, like the COVID pandemic. And these risks are exactly what are called black swans. So the percentage of, and one of the second to last rows that cost black swans, what that shows is outsized risks faced by these mega projects. So 1 in 10 tunnels or dams, for example, end up with 3 times the cost overrun. A final point to point out with this data are the long construction durations. The last row is time spent in construction. And as you can see, it takes anywhere between 3.3 years for IT programs to upwards of 8 years for dams or rail projects. That's more than 2 election cycles just in construction. If you take into account planning horizons, these can be generational projects. So Crossrail was first mentioned in the UK in the 1970s. And when it opened, it would be almost 2 generations would have gone past for the mega project to have become a reality. And you can imagine the mind-boggling complexity that goes with it. When these projects go wrong, they go horribly wrong. So this is the tragic Macondo accident of BP. You can see the share price of BP in purple. It has never recovered from this one accident. And no matter what they do, this is going to be a hangman's knot on the company. This is what.
Atif, if I could just interrupt for a second, or just to ask a question.
Sure.
So you're painting a very bleak picture, and that's great. But I was reading one of your papers the other day, and it was on Chinese dams, right? And it showed a lovely distribution of late projects. So one of the things I think is really important to say is that actually most projects aren't a total disaster, right? So the disaster scenario is not a foregone conclusion, right? So what we're talking about today is understanding why they go wrong so that we can avoid it, right?
Exactly. And I think to some of this, and as you mentioned, the work we've done on China is about doing the right project. So, in case of China, what we showed was that although 1/3 of the number of projects they'd done were welfare creating, 2/3 were not. So the base rate is still stacked against them, but this goes to your point of one needs to prioritize these portfolios a lot better. So you can't just have a laundry list of mega projects and attempt doing all of them, because that's surely a recipe for disaster. But a second point is that even well-chosen projects face large delivery risks, which is what I'll go into now. And these can be managed. So although the message is, for the time being, sad, it's not pessimistic in the sense that one can, with good management, overcome these problems. They can be scaled, but it requires above average creativity, to get it done. So kind of like a default average way of working with mega projects is not going to wrestle them down to the ground. It requires above average work. With this image, I want to show not only that mega projects can be sad, but it's actually the payoff structure of, so with the case of Macondo, the gains are finite. So under no circumstances could Macondo have suddenly produced more barrels of oil than its possible reserves. So the gains are finite, but the pains for BP have been nearly infinite in terms of payouts, litigation costs, negative pressure on the share price, reputational damage, et cetera, et cetera. So those are sort of, semi-frown payoff structures we want to avoid. And let me go a little bit into the 3 causes underpinning these unhappy state of affairs and how do we then fix them, which is what I want to open up. So first of all, this has been a timeless problem. This is dams around the world, and these are dams built from the 1930s up until the 2000s. And as you can see in the blue line, so the red line is on budget. Everything above the red line is a cost overrun. And as you can see, there are a few successes in the sense as if you use on budget or on time as a metric for success. There's a few projects that are either under that line or on it, but the great majority are above it. And some have really outsized overruns, so 50 times in case of a dam in Yugoslavia because of a war and hyperinflation at the same time, and depreciation of the currency. And nearly double is what this ends up being across time. So the problem is timeless. Now, one thing we see, just to make a reference to artificial intelligence, is when algorithms are not working very well, you see them making lots of errors. So their error rate is nearly 100%. So prior to image recognition algorithms, computers could only get 50% of the images right because they just use a randomization algorithm. So they would just swipe right on everything with the hope that at least half will hit. But now they have a better success rate than human beings in tagging cats and dogs. But we haven't come to that level of error rate. So now it's 3% in every 100 images they've shown. What we're seeing here is Megaproject base rate is quite poor. Now, this timeless challenge existed even in Rome. So this is a letter from Pliny to Emperor Trajan, basically saying a huge amount of money and time has been spent trying to build this aqueduct, and it got nowhere. And the emperor writing back a letter like a CEO might write, saying steps must be taken to fix this. Otherwise, there's hell to pay. So, oops, I seem to have lost everybody.
Just while you wrestle with your laptop, that reminds me of when I graduated from university, I went to Egypt for a month, and one of my tutors lent me a book that translated hieroglyphics. And oddly enough, the hieroglyphics seemed, there was a quote in there from 4,000 years ago, a teacher, professor, complaining about the students, and all they wanted to do was drink and chase women. So just like with Megaprojects, some things never change, right?
Exactly, and which is again on display today, and I'm going to talk a little bit about complexity in a second. So 3 causes of failure. I think I have to share my screen again, please. I apologize. This is I use a Mac, and I've always claimed the Macs are very reliable until, of course, you have to give a webinar. So first cause of failure for why these challenges have been so timeless is what's in the literature called optimism bias. And optimism bias is a kitten looking in the mirror, and instead of seeing a little kitten, a fully grown lion with a big mane. We need optimism bias as human beings to get out of bed every morning. And this is based on Nobel Prize winning research by Professor Daniel Kahneman, who with Machiavellis showed that people have systematically underestimated the time it takes or effort it takes to get stuff done. So you might estimate that it might take you 20 minutes to do a grocery run, but then 40 minutes go by and you're still in the grocery store. Or several experiments were run on students in terms of how long they thought it might take them to do a particular task, like write an essay. And their estimates were wildly underestimated the actual amount of time and effort it took. So optimism bias is innate to human beings. A cognitive bias, even knowledge of optimism bias, doesn't help us overcome it. So this is a famous optical illusion in which both lines are meant to be of equal length, but even the person who designed this optical illusion cannot but help see the line below as being longer. So it's just how our brain wiring works. Even though we all know that they're the equal length, we cannot help but see the one below as being longer. And what that reminds us is that even experts are subject to these these cognitive biases. So just because even the ones who design the biases are subject to them. And it's just a human constraint. And sometimes experts can exacerbate these biases. So particularly if they're using rules of thumb that lead them to say, this activity is going to take 2 weeks. And that's the rule of thumb they keep using without checking against the real data. They may be perpetrating that optimism bias throughout their plan, for example. And same with costs. So the other point of this particular slide is that I could be tricking you and I could have deliberately made the line below longer than the line on the top. There's no way for you to test or get this answer right without a foot ruler. So you really need to measure this in order to be sure. There's no way of eyeballing it. So no matter how expert you are, you could be a professor of mathematics, you still have to use a ruler. And that's the role of data. So one has to use data in order to measure elements in a mega project. No matter, you could be a professor of mega projects and you still get these things wrong. Second cause of, an example of that is in the Chivo hydroelectric dam in Colombia. So the ex ante optimism was that they provided no allowance for future fluctuations in the exchange rate. Nearly half the dam was being imported from outside Colombia, so the payments had to be made in the US dollar. And so the exchange rate was really material to the risk in the project. But this is the ex ante document from the World Bank, which financed this project. And it says the government of Colombia is enlightened. And as a result, we don't need to do anything about this risk. Of course, the peso depreciated 99% against the US dollar in that time period, and ended up costing in real terms a 35% increase in cost overrun because of that depreciation. So, don't rely on enlightened government policy as a hedging instrument in megaprojects. A second problem is strategic misrepresentation. So this is a picture of Machiavelli, and the Machiavelli formula is very much applies to megaprojects. So he advised in his book, The Prince, that if you want to get something done, you have to overstate its benefits, you have to understate its costs, you have to overstate the legacy or the wide economic benefits you might get out of it, and you have to understate the disbenefits, the negative environmental impacts. And this is sort of, I'm putting it in contemporary language, but it's not that far off from how Machiavelli was justifying how people ought to be making investments back in medieval Italy as well. And that is how people achieve funding approval for a mega project. So they overestimate benefits, underestimate costs, overestimate positive development impacts, underestimate negative environmental impacts, and that's how you get the money out of government coffers.
And Atif, do you think that's deliberate, or do you think that's just part of human nature and those biases you were talking about?
So it's both. So in case of biases over here, there's a tendency already in this direction, but we were naive to think that there isn't deliberate cooking as well. And depending on the incentive structure in the organization, one or the other becomes more important. Typically, and I'll give an example, of course. For example, AECOM settled recently a 200 million Australian dollar suit. And it's a very good example in the public domain of where a set of experts went about cooking traffic forecasts for a tunnel project in Australia. Now, in this case, they got caught and heavily penalized for it. But if you privately speak, and as many of the academics have, interviewed anonymously, hundreds of individuals are in the industry, almost all of them privately will own up to a degree of fudgery. And it's just simply seen to be part of the course in order to get anything through,
Now, at this point, a bunch of people on the call are probably raising their eyebrows and going, "Oh my God, these politicians, they should all be fired," and all the rest of it. But I can tell you that this goes on in companies, it goes on in charities, it goes on everywhere, right? Yeah. So this isn't interesting. What I find really interesting is that everything you've said so far applies to mega projects. And it applies equally, I think, to more mundane IT projects or whatever it may be. So yeah, sorry, I keep interrupting you. Carry on.
No, absolutely. And I think part of this is that these are big issues, but because of the scale of mega projects, they tend to magnify. And which is my third and final point about the underlying problem, and we can then collectively move to solutions, is the sheer complexity of a mega project. So this is a plan or a part of a plan of a large mega project illustrated as a linked graph or a precedence network, where each node is the certain activity that needs to get done, and the various lines are forms of relationships among those activities. So some may be finished to start, for example, that in order to build a wall, you have to finish the foundations, etc., etc. But in case of mega projects, of course, these both the number of nodes, so for example, if you're building a nuclear power plant, as well as the relationships, simply magnify out of proportion. To give you an example, in case of Hinkley Point C, it's estimated that nearly 200,000 individual 2-week tasks have to be performed for the nuclear plant to go live. And within those 200,000, there's multiple checklists, a number of job instructions that have to be executed for the nuclear plant to have any hope of being fired up. So insanely complicated. And this complexity tends to be of a non-linear nature. As a physicist, Stuart, you remember your lessons well about in non-linear systems. And P.W. Anderson won a Nobel Prize for this, which is called broken symmetry. And the idea is that more is different. So as you go from a 100-word email to a 1,000-word essay, although the scale of the task has only grown 10 times, the complexity is far greater. So the time estimate of writing a 100-word email does not scale in a linear way. So you can't just say, if it takes me 10 minutes to write a 100-word email, I can, as a result, write a 1,000-word essay in 100 minutes. It just doesn't work that way. You know, a 1,000-word essay is going to take you a couple of days, if not longer. And the qualitative nature of a 1,000-word essay is completely different from a 100-word email. Similarly, if 10,000-word master's dissertation is completely different from a 1,000-word essay. So just 10 essays is not equal to one master's dissertation. And likewise with a PhD, having gone through the pain of writing a PhD, a 100,000-word PhD is not like 10 master's dissertations. It's a completely different beast altogether. So although one can get a master's dissertation done in 3 months, you know, it takes a lot of time to get, certainly more than 30 months, to get a 100,000-word PhD done. So the overall task becomes much more complicated. An example of that is EADS Flamanville nuclear reactor, which we're still waiting with bated breath for it to be fired up. Its cost estimate has ballooned from 1.5 billion euros, I think upwards of 10. Please don't quote me, I haven't looked at it recently, but it's been one of the larger cost overruns among nuclear power plants. And you know, there isn't still any real timetable for when it might go live. The issues are, in a way, a death by 1,000 cuts in that complex precedence network. So huge number of welding problems. They had impurities in their steel dome, which they had to redo. By that time, it was covered in concrete, which was so heavily reinforced, they basically had to blow up the whole thing and kind of start over again in the main, you know, main reactor. So these challenges are so unpredictable. The human teams cannot process this. Herbert Simon, who also won a Nobel Prize in economics, although he was a psychologist and a computer scientist, he's talked about how human beings tend to be quite bad at calculating probabilities. So we have a difficult time really understanding what individual probabilities are, Stuart, as the HP work has also shown. But that problem really magnifies when we're trying to consider composite probabilities. So if you're trying to figure out, you know, what might be the interest rate, the inflation rate, and the exchange rate on any given day, you know, those composite probabilities of just figuring those 3 things out together is just often beyond capability of even very sophisticated management teams. So what do we do about this? And I want to open this up very briefly. I'll just share my what I've staked my career on as the solution. So although these 3 challenges are very different, the solution to them all lies in measurement. Optimism bias, strategic misrepresentation, and complexity can really be boiled down to problems of information. And part of this is that information is out in the external stimuli in the environment of a mega project, and either because of when the brain cannot do the job, i.e. cognitive biases, or when the brain is doing too much of the job, i.e. strategic misrepresentation, or is just simply mind-boggled because of complexity, that information is not translated into a coherent set of actions that need to be undertaken in order to get the project right. So there's a break between stimuli in the world, information stimuli in the real world, and cognitive processing of them in the mind of the organization. and the lag is very long. So it's a little bit like a person who's got their hand on a very hot object, but is simply unable to perceive it because they haven't got neural wiring going up to their brain telling them that they've got their hand on a very hot object. So, by the time they discover it, or if the neural wiring is very slow, by the time they discover it, they would have already done quite a bit of damage to themselves. So the key point there is the main way to fixing it, at least that's the argument I'm putting forward, and I'd like to open this up after this slide, is that there's a huge amount of information about the Megaproject generates in daily course of business, particularly in reasonably competent organizations. So a large utility, a large rail builder, there's hundreds of invoices being generated. There's lots of plans, Excel spreadsheets, et cetera, as long as one is plugged into that unstructured data and sense that data, that data has to be brought in to some kind of an artificial intelligence to do autonomous sense making of it, which is exactly what my company does. And then turn that into insights, so digest that information in a way human beings can actually absorb it. So taking into account human cognitive biases, the information that has to be represented in a way that it can go through our cognitive bias filters. So it requires knowledge of psychology as much as it requires knowledge of artificial intelligence. So I think that's why I'll end, Stuart, and open up to questions from colleagues.
Right. Thank you. So one quick, I don't know if it's a question or an observation, but just before the whole pandemic thing kicked off, I was at a project controls conference in London, and got chatting to a guy who had the opportunity to have some oversight into I think it was Crossrail, actually. You mentioned Crossrail. And the interesting thing there was the PPM tools and the regular reporting and governance of that project was showing green lights, green lights, green lights, green lights, green light, green light, right up until about a month before it was due to open, or a couple of months before it was due to open. And then everything went red, right across the board. And so they had lots of data. What do you think went wrong? Yeah, they had data, but obviously they didn't have the human side of it, the human input from that.
So I think, without going into any specific project, this is a very typical example. There's a very good dissertation one of my former students wrote called "Green, Green, Green, Amber, Red." It was the title of the dissertation, and that is a typical mega project, which is very much this death by 1,000 cuts, or choosing a metaphor, like a frog being boiled. So although the project is deteriorating, people tend not to collect the data on the 1,000 cuts because none of them seem particularly big enough. And then something which seems a bit more bigger happens much later down the road, and then all the blame gets placed on that big event. So for example, say a tunnel got flooded, and then people pretend that the entire project got delayed because the tunnel was flooded, but that's in fact not the case. It was because the air quality plan deadline was missed, and that the groundwater plan deadline was missed, and there's like lots of hundreds of little deadlines were missed along the way, and by the time a slightly bigger event took place, the project was already boiled. It just didn't know it. And at that point, particularly in the earlier phases of the project, senior management, if it doesn't like truthfulness, can really shut its eyes and ears and goes, we don't want to hear bad news, we don't want to see bad news, and it can really reinforce a culture of good news reporting, or certainly not bad news escalation. So that's why that's the strategic misrepresentation piece. It's a form of strategic misrepresentation where bad news is not escalated or certainly talked quickly enough, and that's where one needs, again, artificial intelligence. That's the main purpose of it, to go straight from raw data to the cognitive function of the organization without the data being vetted and editorialized, through the intestines of the organization.
Great. Thank you for that. So folks, what I would suggest is if you have a comment or a question, just type it into the chat. Remember to send it to all panelists and attendees so we can all see it. And then what we can try and do is actually, if somebody's got something interesting to say or to ask, we'll try and unmute you and see if we can make this a little bit interactive. So one of the, just while everybody's, oh, Ian's got something. I'll tell you what, Ian, shall we just unmute you and you can ask your question. Let me just see the full list here. Ian, and let's allow him to talk. There you go. You should be able to talk now, Ian.
Thanks, Stuart. I'll have to bring up the Q&A box to see what I said. Yeah, Atif, how do AI and large data systems handle the issue that past data might not be data of effective practices? So my example is if I look at my personal database, that will demonstrate that it's optimistic for me to believe I can run a mile in 7 minutes. Mm-hmm. It would be dumb for me to target that. Mm-hmm. However, that doesn't mean it's impossible. And I could probably, through changing my practices, run a mile in 7 minutes, but not without changing them. So how do we sift and separate past performance that might be inefficient when we might not be able to envisage or actually understand that there were sort of inherent drivers of inefficiency that we were just not aware of? How do we separate that in a data world? Does that make sense?
Yes, very much so, Ian. It's a phenomenal question, and I'm very pleased that you brought up a sporting analogy because that's very helpful to this argument. So there are two elements of that. One is your internal performance data, which is your past track record of running a mile. Mm-hmm. And then the broader runners populations data of running a mile. And you have to be comparative about it. So you have to look at your own data, but then you have to put it into a probability distribution of all runners. So
I'm thinking about Joe Publics.
Sorry?
I'm thinking about Joe Public, the person who's reasonably fit, but isn't a runner. Because that's
exactly. So that's where, and you'd imagine that. Well, and you could also compare yourself to athletes, etc. So there will be a range in the population.
Yeah.
So that's where a lot of the apps, I'm a keen cyclist and even keen skier. And that cycling apps, for example, are tremendous at this. So Strava or, Garmin's got a number of products. And they do exactly that. They tell you what's your wattage per kilogram, and how does that compare to your wattage per kilogram of everybody else out there. So, for example, a very poor or a recreational cyclist may produce, a ratio of 1 watts per kilogram, whereas a semi-trained or like early trained person may produce 2. A better may produce 3. But somebody who produces 6.8 is going to win Tour de France. Yep. Right. So you sort of know, and you know that the process of going from 2 to 4, 5, or 6 is extreme rigor. So there's like a degree, there's sort of set workouts you have to do with a certain frequency, and there's a nutrition plan that go with it. If you are to have any hope of going from 2 watts per kilogram to 5 watts per kilogram. This is not to say it cannot be done, but that elite performance is elite. It's not, one can't just rock up one morning and have any hope of generating 5 watts per kilogram for even very short periods of duration. So that's precisely the point, Ian, that you need data about your own performance as an organization. Many companies don't even have a comprehensive database of all the mega projects they've ever run internally. Because there's variance even in that data, helpful variance to learn from that. There'd be days that you ran better than the other days. And there'd be better inputs. So did you sleep better? Did you eat better that day when you did run better? And second is then, where is that data about all the other mega projects that have also ran? and which of them are real elite athlete performers. They exist, as Stuart mentioned. Not all projects are failures, but like athletes, there's only a few elites, but many people could cause themselves injuries just by attempting to do more than they ought to be. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, and maybe that there's another part, if I may follow on. So the dilemma I see is when I see recommendations that look at the core average data and things like reference class forecasting, where if you want predictability and you don't want to change your diet and your exercise regime, then I plan to run a mile in 12 minutes, full stop. And if I want predictability, I'll go for 12 minutes. Mm-hmm. But as you said, the actual true value is in the outliers. What was it that this 0.0003% of the world's project actually did?
Yes.
And was it luck or not? And there, I don't want a reference class forecast. I want an outlier forecast as a target.
Yes.
And then that comes onto your governance as to whether it seemed to be a good thing to meet your commitment or to do a damn good job and to spend less money or deliver benefits more quickly. And that seems a dilemma that not just mega projects, all projects suffer from. What are your thoughts on that?
I think so. Your idea of an outlier forecast is a phenomenal one. So for those who don't know reference class forecasting, it's a method originally proposed by Daniel Kahneman that my colleague Ben Flyberg and myself and others in Oxford have also been improving upon over the last 10 years. And what reference class forecasting does is exactly that, is it takes an individual mega project. So first of all, it says mega projects are not unique. They are, even if your project feels very special to you, it simply belongs to a population of other comparable mega projects. So that's one thing for listeners today. If you have a mindset the projects you're working on is somehow unique, if there's one thing you take away from today is they are not unique, no matter how much you insist. Even nuclear fusion reactors are not unique. We could put them in a statistical distribution. One is to put them in a statistical distribution, which is based on comparable past reference class projects, and then see how their time and cost outcomes have performed and use that as a basis of creating risk. One of the drawbacks of that method, of course, as Ian's mentioning, is that it just tells you about the kind of base rate performance, which can be quite dire. So if you are intending to become an elite runner, you become less and less interested, what Joe the Public is doing in terms of running, you become more and more interested in what an elite runner is doing. So that's where I think, Ian, your view of really studying, what amazing performers do is a very, very good idea, with keeping in mind that the reverse of that leads to really poor performance very quickly. And also there isn't like a quick fix. One can't just click one's fingers and become an elite athlete. It's true also of mega project delivery. You can't click your fingers as an organization. So it takes kind of years of discipline in terms of governance, in terms of project prioritization, in terms of data collection, in terms of benchmarking against external industry benchmarks, etc., to be able to get and having the openness in the culture that people can discuss good and bad things in a project openly without it all getting into political contortions. Those are all elements of this elite performance in a mega project environment.
Thanks.
And one of the interesting things that kind of spins out from that as well is that I don't think Atif is saying that just wave some AI at a problem and it goes away. Right? I don't think that's really what Atif's saying. So think of it, the way I think of it is that, your PPM tools, right? Your Primaveras of this world, they're like the rearview mirror in a car. It tells you what's happened. The AI tells you what's right in front of you, right? The AI helps give you an idea of what's in front of the car. And that's what we need, what's likely to happen next. That's what we need to be able to drive it. But then you still need the driver to make decisions about where I'm going to steer and what I'm going to do. And you know, it's making, you know, so you have to, it's not that there's one thing that you do and everything works. You then also have to take all the biases and the influences out of those decisions that are being made on what to do about it. And yeah, and that's where our software, the transparent choice stuff, can help as well, because that's actually all about human biases and correcting for those. So it's not a simple, there's not a simple solution. Like anything that's complicated, there's never a simple solution to fixing it. And you can't just have one leap and Jack is free. You've got to do the hard yards. You've got to do the hard work and earn the wins. But the data and the right tools can help you steer the car more effectively, I think, is really the message. Would you agree with that, Atif?
Very much so. And I think the driving analogy I quite like as well. You know, mega projects we often claim are a little bit like riding a plane, you know. You need human expert judgment, you know, quality of driving. Different people have different quality of driving, but you still need quite a bit of sensor data in order to process that. And, you know, I mean, gone are the days when people were doing this as a manual exercise. So, you know, you need quite a bit of gadgetry in order to navigate it. And then, but you still need a pilot to make sure the plane rides safely.
So Albert actually just made a really interesting point on the chat. He says, is the role of data being overrepresented or overpresented, and digital analytic tools are being preached as an absolute solution? And it talks about, you know, human factors being fundamental in any predictive model. So what do you think? Do you think data is being overpresented here? Is this a case of our own over-optimism bias?
So again, I would say, you know, one has to, like driving, a composite skill. So just because you've got great gadgetry in your Tesla isn't going to, you know, get you to your destination if you don't know how to drive a car. So you still need to learn to drive a car, and you still have to, you know, exercise quite a bit of judgment in order to do it. But, you know, point is, at the moment, people are making multi-billion-dollar decisions. To give you an example, I recently advised on a mega project, which was kicked off, a nearly 12-year rail line, which was kicked off with just an 80-row program. Just the whole work plan, the baseline work plan consisted of 80 milestones. And that's just no way to begin a mega project. You know, with absolutely no detail on what was being done, what was to be done, when, where, you know, how long any of these things take, be it tunneling or cabling or, you know, building cofferdams, et cetera, et cetera. It's just like that cluelessness, and then just kind of jumping into it and seeing, okay, we'll find what we find. That's, you know, a scourge that I'm railing against. And that sort of ties in very well to Tobias's point as well. Upfront decision-making is utterly critical. The kind of poverty of planning up front is tremendous. And it's partly because planning is very difficult. To do it right is very, very difficult. Where technology can play a role is that we now have enough data in the world that any form of artificial intelligence is able to turn that into relatively robust plans very quickly. So people don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time. You know, the amount of time people spend in planning can be years. And that's actually a bit of a problem because the information decays. The paradox is to have very, very high information intensity, but also a lot of information velocity. So you have to collect and process an insane volume and variety of information to get your project right, but you should do it at breakneck speed before the information goes stale. And just not something, you know, a team of even 200-300 planners can do for a big mega project. In fact, as you grow the team, there's more loss of fidelity of that information. So that's where technology is to play a role in keeping human teams extremely small, to make it easier for human beings to communicate with each other, but for them to be able to increase the information intensity and velocity.
Fantastic. Well, with that, we've kind of reached the top of the hour, which is a bit of a shame because I feel we could probably keep this going for another hour. But Atif, thank you very much for sharing your insight with us today. I found it really fascinating, really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the bridge in the background.
Yes.
And just to everybody who joined and to Pretty who helped pull the event together. Thank you to everybody. I hope you enjoyed it too. If you want to follow up with either Atif or me, the slides will come out to you in the next couple of days, as will a recording, and our emails will be included in there. Or as some of you have been doing while we've been talking, reach out and connect with me or with Atif on LinkedIn. We both kind of hang out there occasionally as well. So either of those mechanisms would be really good. Very good. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.